Our hero today is Alexander Rodimtsev, whose name is etched in gold in the annals of two great wars. A legendary man whose destiny is inextricably linked with the most dramatic pages of the 20th century. From the burning fields of the Spanish Civil War to fiery Stalingrad, he was always there, where the fate of the world was being decided. His biography is a kaleidoscope of courage, strategic genius, and unbending will. We will tell about his formation, about how a simple guy from Orenburg province became one of the most outstanding commanders of the Red Army, whose decisions saved thousands of lives and changed the course of history. To understand how the character of a true hero was formed, we must journey to a completely different time and place, to the distant pre-revolutionary childhood of Alexander Rodimtsev, which was spent in the remote Orenburg village of Sharlyk. It was there, amidst the boundless steppes and harsh daily life, that the foundation was laid for the personality that would later shake the world with its courage. The Rodimtsev family was among those called strong peasants. Not rich, but not poor either. A strict but fair order reigned in their home. The father, Ivan Prokofievich, was a man of labor, a jack of all trades, and this love for work, for the land, was passed on to his 5 children. The mother, Maria Pavlovna, managed the entire household, raising the children in a spirit of respect for elders and industriousness. Alexander, born in 1901, was the 3rd child in the family. From an early age, he learned the hardship of peasant labor, herding cattle, helping in the fields, gathering firewood. All this was part of his daily life, but it was not a punishment. It was the natural order of things which hardened his body and spirit. Watching his parents, seeing how they coped with difficulties, Alexander absorbed lessons of resilience, responsibility, and mutual support. Sharlyk was a typical Russian village of that time, where news from the big world arrived late, and life flowed steadily, according to centuries-old traditions. However, even here, in these steppe lands, echoes of the great upheavals shaking the Russian Empire reached them. The Revolution of 1905, the First World War, all this, albeit indirectly, affected the life of the Rodimtsev family, making Alexander, still a mere boy, ponder injustice and change. He was a curious and intelligent child. Despite all the difficulties, his parents tried to educate their children. Alexander completed primary school, which was no small achievement for those times. It was there that he learned to read and write, discovering the world of books, a world that expanded horizons and awakened imagination. But truly serious trials began for young Rodimtsev with the arrival of 1917. The revolution, and then the Civil War, fundamentally changed the accustomed way of life. Passions raged in the Orenburg province, power changed hands, and each day brought new upheavals. At 16, Alexander was no longer a child. He saw chaos, violence, hunger, and these events left a deep mark on his soul. It was during this period, in the fire of civil confrontation, that young Alexander began to realize what it meant to fight for one's convictions, for a better lot. He saw how people changed, how their best and worst qualities manifested themselves. These lessons, learned in youth, would become invaluable experience for the future commander, capable of making decisions in the most difficult, life-threatening situations. The pivotal year of 1920. The country, exhausted by the Civil War, began to recover. It was then, amidst these events, that 19-year-old Alexander Rodimtsev made a decision that would forever define his destiny. He joined the ranks of the Red Army. This was not just a career choice, it was a conscious step towards a new life, full of trials and struggles for the ideals he believed in. Then, in 1920, Rodimtsev was enrolled in the 27th Orenburg Infantry Courses. This was his first encounter with army discipline, with strict routines, and with the fundamentals of military affairs. Young, energetic, and eager for knowledge, he plunged headfirst into his studies. Even then, his leadership qualities, his ability to quickly grasp new concepts, and his knack for finding common ground with comrades were evident. He did not stay long in Orenburg. In 1922, Alexander was transferred to the Etched military school in Moscow, one of the most prestigious military educational institutions of that time. This was a true springboard for future commanders. Here, within the walls of the school, where the best of the best were trained, Rodimtsev received a fundamental military education. Studying tactics, strategy, fire training, engineering, each day was filled with new knowledge and skills. His immersion in military science was comprehensive. He didn't just memorize regulations, he strived to understand the very essence of military art. His inquisitive mind, backed by rural ingenuity, allowed him to quickly analyze situations and make well-considered decisions. Instructors noted his sharp intellect, persistence, and natural charisma, which even then set him apart from other cadets. In 1925, Alexander Rodimtsev successfully graduated from the Etched military school. He was awarded the rank of platoon commander. This was not just a rank, it was recognition of his abilities, his diligence, and his potential. Immediately after graduation, the young commander was assigned to serve in the 31st Rifle Regiment of the 11th Rifle Division, stationed in the Leningrad military district. Here, during peacetime service, Rodimtsev continued to hone his skills. He learned to command people, make decisions in the field, and organize combat training. His platoon was always distinguished by its cohesion and high level of training. He was strict but fair, demanding but always supportive of his soldiers. He was not afraid to take responsibility, which was extremely important for a young commander. Over the years of service in the interwar period, Rodimtsev rose from platoon commander to battalion commander. This was a period of continuous learning and self-improvement. He constantly read military literature, studied the experience of the First World War, and analyzed tactical methods. Each new rank, each new position. It was not just career advancement. It was evidence of his constant development as a military professional. He was a man who did not rest on his laurels, always striving for more, for perfection. And this striving for perfection would soon be put to the test on the battlefields of the Spanish Civil War, where Rodimtsev was to demonstrate all his best qualities and become a true hero. It is 1936. Europe is frozen in anxious anticipation, sensing an impending catastrophe, and on the Iberian Peninsula, the fire of the Civil War is already raging. The confrontation between the Republicans and the Francoist rebels, supported by the fascist regimes of Italy and Germany, became the prologue to a great war. And it is there, into the very inferno, that Alexander Rodimtsev is sent. But not under his own name. To the whole world he is now Pavlito, a military advisor, one of those Soviet volunteers who stood up in defense of the Spanish Republic. This was a time when the world was divided into black and white, and the choice was obvious for those who believed in the ideals of freedom and equality. The task facing the Soviet military specialists was colossal. It was necessary to help the Republic organize a combat-ready army, train soldiers and commanders, and establish supply and logistics in the shortest possible time. Rodimtsev, as an experienced commander with many years of service and deep knowledge of tactics, was sent to the forming international brigades. These units, consisting of volunteers from all over the world, writers, workers, intellectuals, were a symbol of the struggle for freedom. But they acutely lacked combat experience and coordination. Pavlito quickly established himself as a talented organizer and fearless commander. He did not sit in headquarters, but was constantly at the front line, personally participating in combat operations. His experience gained in the Red Army proved invaluable. He taught Spanish and international fighters the basics of tactics, how to set up defensive lines, and conduct offensive operations. Under his leadership, the international brigades transformed from scattered groups of enthusiasts into a formidable force capable of resisting the well-trained and armed Francoists. One of the first serious operations in which Rodimtsev took part was the defense of Madrid. The capital of the Republic was under threat of falling, and it was the international brigades, with the active participation of Soviet advisors, that played a key role in its defense. Rodimtsev saw how desperately the Republicans fought. He saw their courage and determination, and this further strengthened his belief in the just cause. He taught them to withstand blows, counterattack, and use every opportunity to stop the enemy. The Spanish War became a true school of survival and martial art for Rodimtsev. Here, in conditions of real combat operations, against modern weapons and well-trained units, he honed his command skills. He learned to make quick decisions in a constantly changing environment, assess risks, and inspire fighters by personal example. He understood what a new type of war was, with the active use of aviation and tanks. And these lessons would become invaluable very soon, when another, even more terrible war would break out. It was in this fiery crucible, in Spain, where each day became a test of endurance, that Alexander Rodimtsev proved himself to be an outstanding commander, whose actions more than once changed the course of local battles. His tactical skill, personal courage, and ability to inspire fighters in critical moments became legendary among the Republicans. He was not just an advisor, he was a true leader who shared all the hardships of war with his fighters. One of the brightest episodes that brought him fame was the battle for the city of Guadalajara in 1937. The Italian Expeditionary Corps, consisting of 50,000 soldiers and equipped with the latest technology, launched a massive offensive against Republican positions. The forces were unequal, and it seemed that the fall of the city was inevitable. But Rodimtsev, commanding one of the international brigades, understood that retreat would mean disaster. He personally led the defense, was in the most dangerous sectors under enemy fire. His composure and determination spread to the fighters. He taught them to use the terrain, maneuver, and deliver sudden counterattacks. In one of the battles, when Italian tanks broke through the defenses, Rodimtsev, without hesitation, led the fighters in a bayonet charge, repelling the enemy and restoring the situation. This feat, accomplished in conditions when many had already lost hope, became a symbol of resilience and bravery. He saw how desperately the Republicans fought, saw their courage and determination, and this further strengthened his faith in the just cause. He taught them to withstand a blow, counterattack, and use every opportunity to stop the enemy. For his courage and successful command in these battles, Alexander Rodimtsev was awarded the highest award of the Soviet Union, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. This was recognition of his exceptional merits, his contribution to the fight against fascism on Spanish soil. He became one of the first Soviet military personnel to receive this high title for participation in the Spanish Civil War. But not only Guadalajara became his finest hour. During the Battle of the Ebro River in 1938, Rodimtsev again demonstrated his tactical genius. In conditions of fierce fighting, when Republican troops found themselves in a difficult position, he developed and successfully carried out a daring maneuver that allowed part of the units to be withdrawn from encirclement and inflict significant damage on the enemy. His ability to quickly assess the situation, make unconventional decisions, and inspire soldiers by personal example was truly unique. He did not just give orders, he led by example, showing what it means to be a true commander. During his stay in Spain, Rodimtsev gained invaluable combat experience. He saw how a modern army, equipped with tanks and aviation, functions. He studied the enemy's tactics, learned to counteract him. These lessons, learned in conditions of real war, would become the foundation of his future victories. Spain became for him not just a battlefield, but a true academy of military art, where he honed his skills and strengthened his spirit. He returned from Spain not just as a hero, but as an experienced, hardened commander, ready for new challenges. But then, in the late 30s, no one yet suspected what grandiose and terrible events awaited the world ahead, and what role this man, who had passed through the crucible of the Spanish War, would play in them. He returned home with a new understanding of war, with new knowledge, and with an unwavering belief in his own strength. Upon returning from Spain, Alexander Rodimtsev was no longer the young commander he had been 3 years prior. He brought back not only the gold star of the hero of the Soviet Union, but also invaluable experience of modern warfare, which was soon to engulf all of Europe. It was the late 30s. The world held its breath in anxious anticipation, and Rodimtsev, more than anyone else, understood that the lessons of Spain needed to be learned as quickly as possible. He was appointed as an infantry inspector of the Kiev Special Military District, and then as deputy commander of the district's troops for fortified areas. It seemed like staff work, but for Rodimtsev, it was a continuation of the struggle. He actively engaged in generalizing the combat experience gained in Spain. He gave lectures, seminars, shared his observations on the tactics of enemy tank and air units, on the necessity of creating deeply echeloned defenses, and on the importance of maneuver warfare. He literally burned with work, striving to convey to every commander the importance of preparing for a new type of war. He perfectly understood that soon the Soviet Union would have to face a powerful and well-equipped enemy, and every detail, every lesson learned from the Spanish battles, could save thousands of lives. Alongside his service, Rodimtsev continued his education. In 1940, he enrolled in the Military Academy of the General Staff, dreaming of a deep study of military strategy and operational art. This was a man who never stopped developing. He understood that, to be a true commander, one must constantly learn, analyze, and foresee. His academic works and reports were distinguished by their depth of analysis and practical orientation. He didn't just study theory, he filtered it through the prism of his rich combat experience. In these pre-war years, despite intense service, Alexander Rodimtsev did not forget his personal life. He was married, and he had a growing daughter. His family was his support, a quiet refuge where he could rest from anxious thoughts about the impending war. His circle of acquaintances expanded. He communicated with other heroes of Spain, with prominent military figures, with whom he shared his fears and hopes. They all felt the approach of a great storm, and each in their own way prepared for it. Rodimtsev was no exception. He strove to make the most of the remaining time to prepare the army, to meet the enemy fully armed. He understood that his knowledge and experience would be in demand like never before. He was ready for new trials, for new battles, and he knew that these battles would be much more terrible and larger in scale than anything he had seen in Spain. The world was heading for catastrophe, and Rodimtsev was preparing to lead his soldiers in this merciless struggle. June 22, 1941, a morning that divided the lives of millions into before and after. On this fateful day, at dawn, Nazi Germany, without declaring war, attacked the Soviet Union. For Alexander Rodimtsev, as for the entire country, this marked the beginning of a new, most terrible ordeal. He, already an experienced commander, a hero of Spain, met the war as the commander of the 5th Airborne Brigade, stationed in the Kiev Special Military District. His brigade, like many other units of the Red Army, was caught by surprise. But Rodimtsev was not one to flinch in the face of danger. His Spanish experience, the premonition of a great war, about which he so often spoke, now became a harsh reality. The beginning of the war was catastrophic for the Red Army. German troops, using blitzkrieg tactics, rapidly advanced deep into Soviet territory. Rodimtsev's 5th Airborne Brigade found itself at the very epicenter of events. It had to hold back the onslaught of superior enemy forces, which had an overwhelming advantage in tanks and aviation. But the paratroopers, hardened in pre-war exercises and inspired by their commander, were ready to fight to the death. The first battles were incredibly difficult. Rodimtsev's brigade participated in defensive battles on the southwestern front. Near Kiev, in the Korostan area, the paratroopers showed unprecedented resilience. Under continuous bombings and artillery shelling, they held their positions, inflicting tangible losses on the enemy. Rodimtsev personally led the defense, appearing in the most dangerous sectors of the front, inspiring the fighters with his fearlessness. He understood that in conditions of chaos and retreat, the personal example of a commander meant more than any orders. In these first, most tragic months of the war for the Red Army, Rodimtsev proved himself to be an outstanding tactician. He skillfully used the terrain, organized ambushes, conducted daring counterattacks which, although they could not stop the enemy's general offensive, slowed its advance and saved the lives of thousands of Red Army soldiers. He taught his paratroopers to operate in small groups, to use elements of guerrilla warfare, to deliver pinpoint strikes against the enemy's most vulnerable points. His brigade, despite heavy losses, maintained its combat effectiveness and high morale. One of the key tasks that Rodimtsev successfully solved was maintaining control of the brigade in rapidly changing conditions. Communication was often interrupted. Orders arrived late. But the commander of the 5th Airborne Brigade managed to establish effective interaction between units. He trusted his officers, giving them more freedom in making decisions on the ground, which was vital in conditions of constant flank maneuvers and encirclements. The defensive battles of the summer and autumn of 1941 became a real test of strength for the 5th Airborne Brigade. They retreated with battles, not allowing the enemy to develop success, evacuating the wounded and equipment from encirclement. Rodimtsev, as before, shared all hardships with his soldiers. He ate from the same pot, slept next to them in the trenches, and this created an incredible bond between the commander and the fighters. They believed him because they saw that he spared no effort and was ready to give his life for each of them. In those days, when it seemed that all was lost, when German tanks were rushing towards Moscow, Rodimtsev's 5th Airborne Brigade continued to fight. Their resilience, their courage, their readiness to sacrifice themselves for the motherland became one of the few bright spots in this tragic picture of the beginning of the war. Rodimtsev understood that every day, every hour they won from the enemy brought victory closer. And these first, most difficult battles hardened his brigade, turning it into one of the most combat-ready formations of the Red Army, which was to play a key role in the coming, even more terrible battles. The year 1942 arrived. The war continued, and the Red Army, despite heroic resistance, was still under immense pressure. The 5th Airborne Brigade, under the command of Alexander Rodimtsev, tempered in the brutal battles of '41, continued to fight, demonstrating an example of steadfastness and courage. But in the context of changing war tactics and the need to form larger and more versatile formations, there arose a need for reorganization. It was then, in March of 1942, that an event occurred that forever changed the fate of Rodimtsev's brigade and himself. For outstanding combat merits, for the heroism and steadfastness shown in battles, the 5th Airborne Brigade was transformed into the 13th Guards Rifle Division. This was not just a renaming. It was a recognition of the unit's enormous contribution to the defense of the country. It was a sign of the highest distinction. The title of a Guards Division imposed a special responsibility, but also offered new opportunities. Rodimtsev, now the commander of a Guards Division, understood that his soldiers were the elite of the Red Army, and their training had to correspond to this high rank. The primary task became the formation of a new fighting spirit, the spirit of guardsmen. Rodimtsev, like no other, knew how to inspire people. He held conversations with the personnel, speaking about the combat traditions of the Guard, about its heroic past. He emphasized that a guardsman is not only a brave warrior, but also a role model, a person who will not retreat a single step. Special attention was paid to physical training and tactical instruction. Former paratroopers, already in excellent physical shape, under the leadership of Rodimtsev and his staff, mastered new methods of warfare. They trained in swift attacks, in the defense of populated areas, in forcing water obstacles. Rodimtsev personally monitored the progress of the exercises, constantly making adjustments based on his rich combat experience gained in Spain and at the beginning of the Great Patriotic War. He taught his soldiers not only to shoot, but also to think, to make decisions in the most difficult situations, to show initiative. In the new division, strict discipline reigned, but it was combined with respect for each soldier's individuality. Rodimtsev knew each of his soldiers by name, was interested in their needs, and was always ready to listen. This created a special atmosphere of trust and mutual assistance, which is so important in war. He understood that morale is not just about orders, but also about a sense of camaraderie, confidence in the commander and comrades. The first operations of the 13th Guards Division in its new capacity showed that the transformation was justified. The division participated in defensive battles on the southwestern front, inflicting tangible blows on the enemy. They acted cohesively, effectively, demonstrating a high level of training and an unyielding will to win. Every battle, every successfully completed task strengthened the soldiers' faith in themselves and in their commander. Rodimtsev, for his part, was proud of his guardsmen. He saw how they grew as professionals, how their character was forged. He knew that this division, this 13th Guards, was capable of much, and very soon they would have to prove it in one of the most terrible and decisive battles in all of world history, in Stalingrad. But more on that later. It was September of 1942. Stalingrad, once a flourishing industrial center on the Volga, had been transformed into a hell on earth. The city was burning. German troops, after their summer offensive, were rapidly advancing towards the Volga, aiming to cut off the vital waterway and seize the oil-rich regions of the Caucasus. For Hitler, Stalingrad was not just a strategic objective, it was a symbol. The name of the city, bearing the name of his chief enemy, became a personal challenge for him. He ordered the city to be taken at all costs, regardless of losses, and the German Sixth Army, under the command of General Paulus, reinforced with tank and air units, was methodically obliterating Stalingrad from the face of the earth. Constant bombardments and artillery shelling turned the city into ruins. Every house, every block, became a battlefield. Soviet troops, exhausted by heavy summer fighting, were retreating, but resistance did not cease. In early September, the situation was critical. The enemy had already reached the Volga north of the city, cutting off supply routes. The Stalingrad garrison, consisting of units from the 62nd and 64th Armies, was holding on with its last strength. But their positions were melting under the continuous onslaught. The Germans were confident of a swift victory. They believed that the city was practically taken, and only the last pockets of resistance remained. Propaganda trumpeted the imminent fall of Stalingrad, and Hitler was already planning a victory parade on Red Square. But the Soviet command understood that the surrender of Stalingrad would be a catastrophe that could change the course of the entire war. This was not just a city. It was a key to the southern regions of the country, to oil, to the Caucasus. Hold Stalingrad at all costs. Such an order was given to the troops. And it was at this critical moment, when it seemed that almost no hope remained, that Alexander Rodimtsev's 13th Guards Rifle Division entered the scene. They were tasked with achieving the impossible, to cross the Volga under fire and engage in battle to save Stalingrad. The significance of this battle was colossal. It extended far beyond a local skirmish. The Battle of Stalingrad was destined to become a turning point not only in the Great Patriotic War, but in the entire Second World War. Here, on the banks of the Volga, the fate of not only the Soviet Union but of all Europe, of the entire world, was being decided. And every soldier understood this. Everyone understood that the future depended on their steadfastness, on their courage. In these days, when the air was permeated with smoke and death, hope hung by a thin thread. And this thread was to be Rodimtsev's guardsmen, who were to step into the very inferno, into the fiery cauldron of Stalingrad. Twilight gathered over Stalingrad. The city, riddled with craters, blazed, turning into a fiery cauldron. On the left bank of the Volga, amidst chaos and anticipation, Alexander Rodimtsev's 13th Guards Rifle Division prepared to cross. This was not merely a transfer of troops, it was a step into the unknown, into the very inferno, where every meter of land was saturated with death. The Germans, sensing an imminent victory, kept the Volga under continuous fire. Mines and shells methodically plowed the water's surface, turning it into a boiling hell. Everyone who looked at this fiery frontier understood. Surviving such an inferno was a miracle. But Rodimtsev's guards were ready for a miracle. They had to not just cross the river, but to break through a wall of fire. The assault groups went first. Under the cover of night, in fishing boats, makeshift rafts, and miraculously surviving ferries, they moved towards the right bank. With each meter, the tension grew. At any moment, a searchlight could flash. At any moment, a volley of fire could crash down. And it did. German machine guns positioned on dominant heights opened fire. Tracer bullets streaking across the sky, illuminating targets. Shells exploded near the boats, raising columns of water, overturning rafts. Many did not make it across. The Volga, usually calm and majestic, had turned into a mass grave. But those who survived, those who managed to reach the shore, did not flinch. They understood. There was nowhere to retreat. Behind them was the Volga, before them the enemy. And Stalingrad, bleeding, awaited their help. Rodimtsev himself, located on the left bank, personally supervised the crossing. He saw his soldiers dying, the river ablaze, and the last hopes crumbling. But his voice, calm and confident, was transmitted via communication, inspiring commanders and instilling confidence in the hearts of the soldiers. Quote, "On the night of September 14th to 15th, 1942, under the cover of artillery fire, the main forces of the division began to cross. It was a real battle on the water. Sailors of the Volga military flotilla, risking their lives, transported infantry, equipment, and ammunition. Every trip was an act of heroism. Enemy aircraft dropped illuminating bombs, turning night into day, revealing the silhouettes of boats packed with soldiers. But the guards did not retreat. They returned fire, trying to suppress enemy strongholds, and continued to move forward. One of the soldiers, Private Ivan Petrov, recalled, quote, "These words reflected the sentiments of thousands of soldiers who, in those days, accomplished the impossible." By the morning of September 15th, despite colossal losses, the main part of the 13th Guards Division managed to cross to the right bank. But this was only the beginning. The first hours on the right bank were no less dramatic. No sooner had they set foot on land than the Guards entered battle. Germans were everywhere. Every street, every house, every ruin, all of it was permeated with the enemy. The division was immediately thrown into battle to stop the enemy's advance in the central part of the city. Without rest, without respite, Rodimtsev's guards engaged in fierce street fighting. They fought for every floor, for every room, for every brick. This was a war of survival, where there was no place for weakness. And they, the guards, who had passed through the crucible of Spain and the toughest battles of '41, were ready for it. After crossing the Volga, Rodimtsev's guards found themselves in a veritable hell. Stalingrad was not just a city. It was a labyrinth of ruins, smoking skeletons of buildings, where every basement, every breach in a wall could become a firing point. Here in this stone desert, entirely new approaches to combat were required. The headquarters of the 13th Guards Division, under Rodimtsev's leadership, drawing on their Spanish experience in urban warfare, began to form a unique tactic that would later enter history textbooks. Instead of customary frontal assaults, the division shifted to creating a system of strong points. Every house suitable for defense was transformed into an impregnable fortress. Special attention was paid to all-round defense to prevent the enemy from outflanking and encircling positions. For this, all available means were used: bricks, beams, sandbags. Walls were reinforced, windows and doors were bricked up, leaving only narrow loopholes for firing. Underground passages and trenches were created between such strong points, allowing soldiers to move covertly and maneuver. The famous Pavlov's house became a symbol of this tactic. A small four-story building located on January 9th Square controlled the approaches to the Volga and held strategic importance. A group of soldiers led by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov captured it and held it for 58 days, repelling countless enemy attacks. This house became the embodiment of resilience and courage, an example of how even a small unit, skillfully using the terrain, can tie down significant enemy forces. Rodimtsev personally oversaw the actions of Pavlov's house defenders, providing them with everything necessary. But Pavlov's house was just one of many pockets of resistance. The entire division operated as a single, well-oiled mechanism. Rodimtsev developed the tactic of assault groups, consisting of submachine gunners, machine gunners, grenadiers, and sappers. These groups, acting autonomously, infiltrated enemy rear areas, launched sudden attacks, destroyed communications, and sowed panic. They used every basement, every pile of stones for covert movement and sudden appearances, catching the Germans off guard. Special importance was attached to the interaction of various branches of service. Snipers, who became a true legend of Stalingrad, eliminated enemy officers and machine gunners. Artillery, located on the left bank of the Volga, fired accurately at designated targets, supporting infantry actions. Sappers cleared passages through minefields, set up obstacles, and also actively participated in demolishing buildings, creating additional obstacles for the enemy's advance. An innovative method was the use of so-called fire sacks. Soldiers intentionally retreated, luring the enemy into a trap, and then annihilated them with concentrated fire from all types of weapons. This allowed inflicting maximum damage on the enemy with minimal losses on their own side. Rodimtsev personally conducted briefings, explaining to commanders and soldiers the peculiarities of this new type of combat, emphasizing the need for initiative and ingenuity. This tactic of urban warfare, developed and applied by the 13th Guards Division, became a true revelation. It allowed for effective combat against a numerically superior and better-equipped enemy, turning every house, every street, into a deadly trap for the foe. Rodimtsev's guards showed that in the conditions of an urban labyrinth where the advantage in technology is negated, courage, endurance, and tactical skill become decisive. They did not just defend, they imposed their war on the enemy, a war for which the Germans were completely unprepared. 58 days. 58 days and nights in hell, where every breath was permeated with smoke, and every sound was a harbinger of death. That's how long Alexander Rodimtsev's 13th Guards Division spent in Stalingrad, fighting for every meter of ground. Daily life here was far from the usual peaceful existence. It was a struggle for survival, where the thin line between life and death blurred with every hour. The main problem was supplies. Delivering food, ammunition, and medicine across the Volga, which was under constant shelling, was a true feat. Every barge, every boat that broke through the fiery barrage risked being destroyed. Yet, despite the losses, supplies, though meager, reached the front line regularly. Soldiers received their daily norm of bread, concentrates, sometimes meat or fish, but most often it was soldiers' porridge, cooked with water or hardtack. Water was another valuable commodity. It was extracted from the Volga, settled, boiled, but there was always a shortage. Medical aid in such conditions was heroic work. Medics and nurses, risking their lives, pulled the wounded directly from under fire. Medical battalions were located in basements, in ruined buildings, where operations were performed by the light of oil lamps, to the accompaniment of explosions and gunfire. Surgeons worked for many hours without a break, saving lives. Many wounded, despite the severity of their injuries, refused evacuation to the left bank, striving to stay with their comrades. This was a spirit that could not be broken. Communication was vital. Broken wires, malfunctioning radios, all this was the norm. Signalmen worked around the clock, restoring lines under fire, laying new ones. Often, information was transmitted through messengers who, risking being killed, made their way through the labyrinths of ruins, delivering reports and orders. Rodimtsev personally ensured that communication with every unit was as reliable as possible. Understanding that in urban combat, without coordinated actions, the division was doomed. Relations between soldiers and commanders in this hell were special. There was no room for formalities here. Death equalized everyone. Commanders shared all hardships with the soldiers, ate from the same mess kit, slept side by side in trenches and basements. Rodimtsev, as before, was not just a superior, he was a father, an older brother to every guardsman. He knew many by name, inquired about their families, and maintained morale by personal example. Strong cohesion, a sense of camaraderie, mutual assistance. This is what allowed the soldiers to endure. They were one family, where everyone was ready to cover a comrade, to give their last crumb of bread. Jokes, songs, short breaks between battles. All this helped to preserve humanity in inhumane conditions. Letters from home, though rare, became priceless relics, giving hope and strength to continue the fight. But the main thing, of course, was the battle. Constant, exhausting, merciless. For every house, for every floor, for every brick. Hand-to-hand combat in narrow passages, throwing grenades into basements, storming stairwells. The Germans, demoralized by such resistance, often did not understand where the blow would come from. Rodimtsev's guardsmen, using the tactic of small assault groups, infiltrated the rear, set up ambushes, sowing panic among the enemy. These 58 days became not only a trial but also a triumph of the human spirit. In conditions where everything seemed to be against them, Rodimtsev's guardsmen turned Stalingrad into an impregnable fortress. Their resilience and courage not only stopped the enemy, but also became a harbinger of the coming turning point in the entire Great Patriotic War. Their feat is forever inscribed in history as an example of unyielding will and unparalleled heroism. 58 days in the hell of Stalingrad changed not only the lives of thousands of soldiers, but also the entire course of World War II. It was during this period, from September to November 1942, that Alexander Rodimtsev's 13th Guards Rifle Division became the steel backbone around which the Soviet command was able to build its defenses and prepare a decisive counterattack. Its role in the overall context of the Battle of Stalingrad cannot be overstated. When Rodimtsev's guardsmen crossed the Volga, the situation in the city was critical. German troops, having broken through to the center, threatened to completely cut off the 62nd Army from supplies, depriving it of its last connection with the mainland. The fall of Stalingrad seemed inevitable, and it was at this moment, when every minute counted, that the 13th Guards Division stood as a wall against the advancing enemy, holding key positions in the city center, such as Mamayev Kurgan, the railway station, January 9th Square, and of course, the famous Pavlov's house, became vital. These strongholds, transformed by the guardsmen into impregnable fortresses, tied down enormous enemy forces, preventing them from developing their offensive and transferring reserves to other sectors of the front. The Germans were forced to spend precious time, strength, and resources storming every building, every block, suffering colossal losses in the process. The constant pressure exerted by Rodimtsev's division prevented the German command from concentrating forces for a decisive breakthrough to the Volga. This allowed Soviet troops on the left bank to regroup, bring up reserves, and most importantly, develop a plan for a counteroffensive. Operation Uranus. Every day that Rodimtsev's guardsmen wrested from the enemy became a brick in the foundation of the future victory. Their steadfastness and perseverance demoralized the enemy. German soldiers, accustomed to swift victories, faced unprecedented resistance in Stalingrad. They could not understand how Soviet fighters continued to fight in conditions of complete encirclement, without food, water, or ammunition. The fighting spirit of Rodimtsev's guardsmen was not broken, but only tempered in this hell. And this was transmitted to other units, inspiring them to fight. The contribution of Rodimtsev's division was recognized at the highest level. In his reports, the commander of the 62nd Army, General Vasily Chuikov, repeatedly emphasized the heroic role of the 13th Guards. He wrote that Rodimtsev's division saved the army from defeat and the city from falling. These words are the best testament to their feat. Thus, the actions of the 13th Guards Rifle Division in Stalingrad became not just a heroic episode, but a strategically important factor. They not only halted the German offensive at a critical moment, but also created the conditions for the successful conduct of Operation Uranus, which led to the encirclement and subsequent defeat of Paulus's 6th Army. Their resistance allowed the Soviet command to gain the time needed to prepare a counteroffensive, which became a turning point in the Great Patriotic War and a harbinger of final victory. Without their unparalleled courage and resilience, history could have taken a completely different path. The Stalingrad epic concluded. Paulus's 6th Army was defeated, and the sun of victory once again shone over the Volga. But for Alexander Rodimtsev and his 13th Guards Rifle Division, this was just the beginning of a new stage of the Great War. Ahead of them lay new battles, new trials, a path from Stalingrad all the way to Berlin. For the heroism and courage displayed in Stalingrad, the division received the honorary title of Poltava, and Rodimtsev himself was awarded the Order of Suvorov First Class. But there was no time to rest on their laurels. In 1943, the Red Army launched a strategic offensive, and Rodimtsev's guardsmen were at the forefront of this movement. In the summer of 1943, the division participated in one of the key battles of the Great Patriotic War, the Battle of Kursk. Here, on the fiery Arc, Rodimtsev once again demonstrated his tactical prowess. His guardsmen fought on the southern face of the Kursk salient, where the Germans threw their best tank divisions into battle. Rodimtsev's division skillfully combined defensive actions with daring counterattacks, inflicting significant losses on the enemy. The battles were incredibly fierce, but the guardsmen held firm, preventing the enemy from breaking through their defenses. The division particularly distinguished itself during the Belgorod-Kharkov offensive operation, known as Operation Rumyantsev. Rodimtsev's guardsmen, operating as part of the 5th Guards Army, broke through the enemy's deeply echeloned defenses, liberating towns and villages. Their rapid offensive was a model of military skill, and Rodimtsev himself repeatedly noted the personal courage of his soldiers, who, sparing no effort, pressed forward. In the autumn of 1943, the division received a new, no less complex task: the forced crossing of the Dnieper. This, one of Europe's largest rivers, became a serious obstacle on the path of the Red Army. The Germans had created a powerful defensive line on the right bank, known as the Eastern Wall. Rodimtsev, using his experience of crossing the Volga, meticulously planned the operation. On the night of September 28th to 29th, the guardsmen began the crossing under the cover of darkness. Under continuous enemy fire on makeshift rafts, fishing boats, they overcame the wide river. Many did not make it across, but those who reached the right bank immediately engaged in battle, seizing and expanding bridgeheads. For the successful crossing of the Dnieper and holding the bridgehead, Alexander Rodimtsev was awarded his second Gold Star of the Hero of the Soviet Union. This was a rare occurrence in the history of the war, a testament to his exceptional merits. After the Dnieper, the combat path of Rodimtsev's division led through Ukraine, Poland, and then Germany. They participated in the Korsun-Shevchenkovsky, Lvov-Sandomierz, Vistula-Oder, and Berlin offensive operations. Rodimtsev's guardsmen were always at the spearhead of the attack, demonstrating the highest combat training and an unyielding spirit. They liberated cities, broke through enemy defensive lines, bringing the long-awaited victory closer. In April 1945, the 13th Guards Division stormed Berlin. This was the last, most ferocious battle. Every house, every street of the Reich's capital was turned into a fortress. But Rodimtsev's guardsmen, who had passed through the crucible of Stalingrad, knew no fear. They fought for every meter, for every floor, until the banner of victory was raised over the Reichstag. The war ended. General Rodimtsev and his guardsmen honorably traversed this incredibly difficult path, leaving behind a glorious mark in history. The war ended. The salvos of victory died down, but life went on, and for Alexander Rodimtsev, a hero of two wars, it entered a new phase, peaceful, but no less responsible. The post-war years were for him a time of creation, of transferring invaluable experience and educating new generations of defenders of the motherland. He did not retire, but continued active service in the armed forces. In 1946, Rodimtsev was appointed commander of the 32nd Guards Rifle Corps, and then, in 1953, first deputy commander of the troops of the East Siberian Military District. His experience, accumulated in the crucible of two wars, was more in demand than ever. He actively engaged in the development of new regulations, methods of combat training, taking into account the lessons of past battles. Especially valuable was his knowledge in the field of urban combat and defense organization, which became the basis for the formation of modern tactics of motorized rifle and airborne troops. Rodimtsev did not just hold high positions. He was a mentor, a teacher for young officers. He gave lectures, seminars, shared his memories of Stalingrad, of forcing the Dnieper, of the assault on Berlin. His stories were not just dry reports, but living lessons of courage, steadfastness, and strategic thinking. He taught not only tactics, but also what a true commander is, a person who cares for his soldiers, who leads them by personal example, who is capable of making decisions in the most critical situations. After retiring with the rank of Colonel General in 1966, Alexander Rodimtsev did not cease his public activities. He actively participated in the veteran movement, met with school children and students, telling them about the Great Patriotic War, about the feat of the Soviet people. His memoirs, Under the Sky of Spain, and The Guards Stood to the Death, became an important contribution to military literature, preserving for descendants the true history of those terrible years. The memory of General Rodimtsev and the 13th Guards Division is carefully preserved in modern Russia. Streets in Volgograd, Orenburg, Kiev are named after him. A bust has been erected in Sharlyk, his homeland. Museums and schools bear the name of the legendary division commander. Events dedicated to his feats, veteran meetings, lessons of courage, are held annually. Children study his biography, know about his role in the Battle of Stalingrad, about his unparalleled courage. But Rodimtsev's most important legacy is not just his name on memorial plaques. It is the lessons of his command experience, which are relevant today. Lessons of steadfastness when it seems that all is lost. Lessons of initiative and ingenuity in conditions of limited resources. Lessons of personal responsibility for every soldier. Lessons on how important it is to inspire people, to unite them around a common goal. His example shows that a true leader is not one who gives orders from the rear, but one who is next to his fighters, sharing with them all the hardships of war. The study of his urban combat tactics, methods of personnel training, his ability to adapt to changing circumstances, all this remains valuable material for modern military leaders. The history of Alexander Rodimtsev is not just the biography of an outstanding military leader. It is a call to memory, to understanding the price of victory, and to realizing the responsibility for preserving peace. It is a story of how one person, possessing an unbending will and faith in his ideals, is capable of changing the course of history, and his feat will live for centuries, inspiring new generations to serve the motherland.